Principles Over Profits podcast 2024 year end. And today's topic I'm discussing, well, I'm commenting here and there about the notion of culture, particularly as it relates to hip hop. And the title, as y'all can see, is Whose Cultures Is It Anyway? I trust that you'll listen through and through because it's a little bit disjointed at times because the idea is that, you know what they say, it's a train of consciousness, but pay attention. I think there's a lot of jewels to be, garnered there. And I'm looking forward to hear y'all comments in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe and press the notification button. Happy New Year. Ladies and gentlemen, how y'all doing? Peace, peace. Gandhi the Zoe. I'm back with another episode of Principles Over Profits podcast. It's been a minute, but it's justified, right? Let me give y'all a quick explanation of why I've been missing, why I didn't release any new content and any new episode. Basically, I was finishing my thesis, right, for my master's degree. It's a mini book, so there was a lot of research and a lot of going back and forth, with documents, etc. And so that took a lot of my time, so I couldn't concentrate on doing anything else. But now that I'm practically done and ready to defend, I thought it was appropriate, right? Since the year is about to finish, we're about to enter a brand new year, God willing, 2025. So you know what? Let me holler at my peoples. And it's actually apropos because at the same time, there's if you want to say, an issue that's going on in the music industry and greater popular culture in the United States. And I would say that it also bleeds over into Canada. And I think it's something that we should talk about, right? And I'll give y'all my commentaries and my perspective on it. And what is that particularly is recently, Lord Jamar, he was not Lord Jamar, my apologies, Fat Joe. But you'll see why I said Lord Jamar. Fat Joe was a guest on the Math Hoffer uh, podcast, and it was a discussion about. Well, it was a broad discussion, but a particular aspect of the discussion went viral because Fat Joe seemingly uh, was making disparaging statements about members of the FBA, right? For those who are not familiar with this acronym FBA, it stands for Foundational Black Americans. Um, Now, notice I say seemingly because it need not necessarily be disparaging, looked at like it was a disparaging statement that he was making, but I can see why some people who I guess identify as FBA took an issue with his, I guess, tone and the statement that he made. But it's so well, he also, yes, definitely he attacked Lord Jamar, right? He said something. So when we say disparaging, we could say that he said some disparaging words about Lord Jamar, formerly a brand Nubian, right? For those of y'all who want to know, if y'all not familiar with what happened, go on Math Offer's page, look on his podcast, and look for the recent episode with Fat Joe, and you'll hear exactly what he said. But what I think is important, what I wanted to discuss, what touched me, and what I felt was necessary for me to comment on, is this notion of culture. Because in making the statement that Fat Joe made, right, it's basically he was. Let me put. You know what? I'll give y'all, I guess, a summary from how I understood what I think he was trying to say. Clearly, he feels offended because there's been a discussion going on for a few years now, right, within greater, if you want to say, hip hop culture. I'm using those terms. When I say culture, I'm using it loosely here, okay, and you'll see why. And this is what I wanted to have this discussion on this with y'all, okay? So within hip hop culture or the music industry or greater popular culture in the United States and in Canada, there's been, and in greater American society, actually, there's been this, back and forth between the different actors about this question of who created or who started hip hop culture. Now, you have some who are saying that it was a, how do I say this, a mixture, right, of different groups of people in the ghettos of New York City, particularly the Bronx. So the initial or the popular story, right, as it's told, is that they were young African Americans, right, and young Hispanics who together started, if you want to say, or develop a propelled hip hop culture. Now, on the other side, right, on the other end, you have um, others, other proponents, right, who argue that no, it is strictly a Black African American. I'm using this loosely because obviously now we've entered a new age, right? Like we just mentioned FBA, because some of these people today, they identify themselves as FBA. They argue that no, it's hip hop is strictly a foundational Black American invention. And some people like Lord Jamar, for example, he's part of that group of people who argue that, well, he's not denying that people from the Caribbeans and Hispanic people and the ghettos of New York contributed into the development and proliferation of hip hop culture, or maybe more specifically rap music. However, he remains firm in stating that, or that it was Black or African American, or more specifically foundational Black Americans who created it. So this started a whole polemic because obviously Fat Joe, he's Hispanic, right? He's Puerto Rican heritage. And he, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, he's a member of the Zulu Nation, right? With Africa Bambaataa and all these dudes who um, I guess are usually represented as some of the founders, right? And pioneers of hip hop, the hip hop movement. So Fat Joe clearly he took offense, right? He takes offense actually because he still does. He like, excuse me, about that claim that that Puerto Ricans, or more broadly Hispanic youths, didn't or weren't part of the nexus of hip hop movement. So he said, like I said, some things that could be seen as disparaging against those FBAs, and more specifically Tariq Nasheed and Lord Jamar. And these two individuals, and they're on their end, they've been responding to him on social media. So where do I stand with this, right? So what I find, or what I find important, right, or about, or the commentary I should say, that I would like to bring, or my 2 cents anyway, that I would like to bring into this greater discussion. I think if it remains a discussion, dialogue, no matter how heated it gets, it's healthy. You need that, right, in society. Now, being that it's hip hop or rap music, we usually get in our feelings, and then it conflicts or disagreements or dialogues usually um you know f- spill out into the street. Now I would hope that it doesn't go there. So this is why I felt like, what, let me bring my 2 cents, and those who are interested, they could benefit from what I did, that I'm going to comment on, and they could also engage with me in the comments, obviously, or hit me up on Instagram to let me know what they think. So there's a few things, okay, that I think there's a let me tell you why I think there's a problematic. So the discussion, I think the top, because there's a lot of underlying ideas, okay, that are um how do I say this? I'm trying to see how to articulate what I'm trying to say to y'all. So within this greater discussion about who originated hip hop, right? There are a lot of issues. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. So there's an issue of obviously it's there's identity politics in it, right? There's an issue of race. There's the issue of class also, and I'm gonna delineate what I mean by issue of race, class, and I guess greater identity politics. Let's start with race. Obviously, the people who identify as foundational Black Americans. That's this is a new way that they describe themselves, but they describe themselves as blacks, right? And obviously, as the Black race or Black culture. The people on the other end who are obviously Hispanic, it's not necessarily a race, but you could say that they also understand themselves collectively as a particular culture. So so here you have like a conflict between it's not generalized yet, but I feel that it could, though it could become a big issue, right? So this is why I was like, let me comment on this. Let me give my 2 cents and maybe that could help, you know what I'm saying? And moving this discussion in a more constructive, you know what I mean, and positive direction. So, because look, people are very passionate about their what they deem themselves to be, you know, whether it's their race, sex, gender, especially in our time, right? So like once you start getting into identity politics, a lot of times it seems that reason and logic it's going out, right? Out thrown out the door. And it's just mere emotion and passion, right? That is activated, if you want to say, right? So I feel like we gotta be careful. This should not become an issue between Hispanics and FBAs, right? In my opinion, as if you want to say, I don't adhere, as those of y'all who've been following this podcast, you know that personally I don't adhere to this idea or notion of race no longer. So I don't see myself as black, white, even in terms of culture, for example. Look, I was born in the Caribbeans, right? Was born in Haiti. But in the 80s, right? Early 80s, we moved to the United States of America. So I was raised in America. So I've been Americanized. So culturally, if we would say, I live in Canada now, in fact, right? But culturally, the way that I see myself, I'm an Americanized Haitian born individual. But I don't adhere to this notion of black because I think this idea of race is nonsense. It doesn't really stand on anything, right? So I'm telling you this. The reason I'm bringing you all this quick background information about myself is so that you know I can contextualize my points that I'm going to make. Right. So this notion again of you know foundational blacks having created or inventing or founding hip hop movement or blacks and Hispanics, to me it's like I feel it's tedious. I understand why it matters to people, and I'm not trying to demean um, you know, their feelings, but I'm trying to see it a little bit more objective. So culture, right? So when you talk about hip hop movement, it's a very complex thing to discuss. That's why you see I'm kind of hesitant because I'm trying to see this is live, okay? I didn't premedit. I just know that I wanted to talk to you all about this subject, but I didn't plan it out. So, but it's a very complex thing, okay? Like I said, because there's a lot of issues that are under this greater, if you want to say, problematic, right? So when you say hip hop, a lot of times you hear people say hip hop culture, but what do we mean by culture, right? So I'm saying like when you're having discussion, it is always um, best, right, to first define the topic of discussion so that the parties who are involved, they all stand on the same ground, right? Knowing that, oh yeah, this is what we're talking about. But I feel that both sides, right, of this discussion, they're talking past each other. They're not necessarily because they haven't really truly defined. Because and one, and yeah, they seem to be discussing about who started hip hop culture, but then there's a bunch, like I said, like there's this notion of race, culture, and then you start getting into even in a sense Drake, this issue between Drake and Kendrick Lamar and the greater music industry. That's in there too, right? So there's a lot that I feel that should be unpacked. We don't have a lot of time. I'm not gonna keep y'all long. But what I'm saying is, look, we need to define in this discussion. I feel people should define specifically what they mean by culture, right? Because hip hop, from my, if you were to say my understanding, right? So hip hop is technically it's a subculture. What do I mean by subculture? Because look, hip hop as a movement, right? It's what is it? That's what I'm saying. We need to define it again. People presuppose they know what they mean when they're saying hip hop culture or hip hop movement. But I feel like because this is so um complex, they need to first delineate what they mean. So I'm saying, look, hip hop as a movement is a subculture. It started as a subculture within what greater American culture, or more specifically, um, well, back then, the group, the ethnic group, right, was known as African American at that time, right? Late 60s, early 70s, if I'm correct. So these people were classified within greater American society as African Americans or blacks, right? So most of the so I would say so when that movement started, right, in these ghettos. Now, whether Hispanics or for me, that got the topic of discussion, like I feel like I say for me, it's not that it's not an interest of mine, but for this particular discussion, I feel like this is the it's not really like that's not really what the issue is. You know what I mean? Like it's not well who started it, like because it's very complex. So look, as a within greater American society, right? You have, as they explain, a group of um, youths in the ghettos of New York City who impoverished and felt marginalized, expressed, you know what I'm saying, if you want to say their frustrations and their lack of integration within the greater American culture through music, art, um, dance, etc. Right? And they got to express, you know, like some of these like I said, frustrations through these, if you want to say, through these different how would I classify it? Different means, right? Dancing, music, and art, right? So by that, what do we mean specifically? Graffiti, rap, breakdancing, right? But notice what I was saying, like, it was a subculture because these people, whether they accept it or not, or whether what people am I talking about? These disenfranchised youths in the ghettos of New York, okay? Whether they know it or accepted it, or whether the greater society at that particular time um, did emphasize it, these people were Americans. They were American citizens, and they were born in America. Therefore, were shaped by greater American culture. Okay. So hip hop at that particular time, that's why it's like, oh, it's a subculture, right? It's like something that maybe your group, a minority group of people within the greater culture, it's a way of that they expressed themselves. Now, as I'm gonna skip steps because like I said, this is very complex, right? So as industry, right? As this, if you want to say this movement now, as people who are businessmen, okay, within the greater entertainment world in the United States started to see, you know, profitable interest, right? And exploiting, and by exploit, I don't mean this and morally. I mean basically, well, making money from it, right? They started to see like, hey, you know what, we could make some money out of this. So that subculture or that movement, right? A bunch of people who were not part of these regions, if you want to say, right, and who probably most likely did not identify with these disenfranchised, excuse me, disenfranchised youths, right, in New York. My apologies for the mispronunciation. Then they didn't identify with them ethnically, right? They didn't identify with them socially, but saw, right, that, yeah, you know what, we could make money out of this. So we're gonna commodify it. So in commodifying this movement, right? Well, what movement? What would be called hip hop, the subculture, what? Dancing, form of expression, dancing, graffiti, art, right? And rapping. And you could throw in DJing because I put DJing and rapping together because it's just music, right? So these people started to commodify this movement into a product, right? And obviously, it took years, right? But here's what I'm trying to, I would like for y'all to understand, right? As this movement is being commodified, whatever form that movement had, right, in the ghettos of New York, it was being transformed. Okay, so from 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 the time the businessman, okay, corporate America started to get involved into, if you want to say this subculture or this subgenre of greater American culture, it started to be transformed and metamorphosized into something else. Okay, this is important because, like I said, I think we need to put this into perspective in this greater discussion. So that's why I say, look, it's one thing to discuss who created, if you want to say, 'cause I don't think anybody, from my perspective, nobody created hip hop because these are forms of expression within greater American culture. No, let me say it slowly again. The things, the activities that people participate in hip hop, graffiti, breakdancing, DJing, um, rapping. These are forms of expression or expressions within greater American culture. Or, what I mean by that is, like, for example, look, America has forms of music, styles of music that were created only in America, right? So, for example, um, let me stick to this. Black music, for example, what's so-called black music, right? Soul, R&B, gospel, etc. These are they're modern. By modern, I mean late 19th, 20th century inventions of Americans, right? Black Americans mostly, but Americans nonetheless. The reason I say Black Americans mostly because in telling the story, right, of, if you want to say, American culture or Black culture, a lot of time, that's why I say this stuff is complex. Look, it's the same thing in hip hop. Like, it's like, look, for example, soul music, right? When soul music is something that people did, and again, the areas where Black Americans lived, especially if it during the time of segregation, right? These people were again marginalized. They couldn't participate within greater um, American culture, or they could not exploit, if you want to say, their arts, their talent within the greater American entertainment industry. So they formed, in their neighborhoods or in their states, if you want to call it, their own little movements and their own little industries, right? Um, and that was fine, right? If it stayed that way. Again, the minute you have greater um, corporate America starting to involve itself, and to me, it's not a good. I'm not doing a moral evaluation here, by the way. I'm just trying to be very objective. So it doesn't matter was it good, bad. I don't have an issue like, well, capitalism. Well, that's capitalism and capitalism. America as a country is a capitalist country, and that's not a bad or a good thing. Okay, I digress. So soul music. I was using soul music so I could make. I use it as an example to situate or substantiate what I was saying about hip hop movement being commodified. Okay, I'm saying with soul music it was the same thing. With gospel music it was the same thing. When corporate America decided that these genres of music, excuse me, could be exploited, okay, to make money. Obviously, they took these genres of music, and by they I mean corporate America, commodify them. By commodify, I mean you start changing it into a product um, that can be that the greater public can consume. So once you do that, it's no longer what it was. You get me? Like whatever these people were doing, right, in the different neighborhoods and of Black America, by the time greater corporate America, okay, and the music or entertainment industry started to get involved in it, right, to exploit it, they transformed it. So it was no longer what it was when it was in the hood. What I'm trying to say by this, okay, is to say so, and that if you take into consideration for me to say, look, I think what I'm saying is fact, okay, but let's consider that you don't agree with what I'm saying, okay, that you have data that shows that what I'm just explaining here is not how it happened, okay? But consider for a minute that, okay, that's how it happened. If it's true, okay, that you have forms of expressions, artful expressions within one particular ethnic group, okay, within a greater culture, and then industry come and take, okay, these forms of expressions, transforms them, package them so that they can sell them, okay, to the greater public. Then, like I said, my argument or my thesis is that, oh, then the product, what it was, it wasn't a product then. It was probably a product in the hood, probably a product in the ghettos, but it was in a product within greater America. Okay. By the time they commodify it, excuse me, I'm putting this paper down. So they transform the product. So the product is well, they transform the raw material, okay, into a product. Therefore, that raw material is no longer what it was. What am I trying to say by this? I'm saying so in this sense, right? Who made soul music? The soul music that most of us, okay, within the greater um, American culture, but globally are familiar with, right? It's the soul music that the music industry gave us. So, in this sense, I'm gonna say it. In this sense, okay, what we mean by black music, okay, and the pure sense of what the term, the expression black music means, uh, excuse me, what we got to consume and what we're familiar with as soul music, it's not black music per se. The music industry label the product black music, right? To make it a genre, to sell it. But I'm saying from the time it left the ghettos, okay, and what they did with it, and who are the days, the most of the people, okay, these times, okay, in the history of America, who were in these positions of power, and probably still now in the music industry and the greater entertainment industry, they identify as white or Caucasian. So in this sense, my proposition is that so soul music, R&B music, and now moving back to our topic of discussion, what matters to us today? Well, hip hop music, in a sense, the hip hop music that generally we're talking about, right? This is a it's it's a potpourri. You know what I mean? Like it's a mixture of the raw material. Yes, you could say is black, but the final product, right? If you're being honest, okay, if you're being objective to um, the the phenomenology, if you want to say, or like the development, okay, of this genre, if you want to say, right, of this product, well, like I said, those people, these white businessmen, they commodified, okay, the raw material these blacks were making, okay, and by commodifying, I'm telling you, look, what they did is they made it um palpable, which means they made it so that the greater culture and even the world could consume it. So therefore, in that sense, I would say, well, yes, they label it black music, okay, because you need a label when you're selling products, right? This is what industry is about. But in essence, from my view, you can no longer call it black music.